Well, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today as ITIF releases a new report called How Innovative is China in the Electric Vehicle and EV Battery Industries. I'm Steven Ezel. I'm the Vice President for Global Innovation at ITIF, and I'll be a presenter and moderator today. Apologies that Representative Buddy Carter couldn't be with us. He had to decline at the last minute, but we're going to have an all-star panel discussion nevertheless. Our run of show today is going to be, I'll introduce the report for about 10 minutes and then turn it over to our panelists for their remarks, and we'll save about 15 or 20 minutes for Q&A with you all at the end. So let me go ahead and introduce our panelists now. David Schweitert is the Chief Policy Officer at the Alliance for Automotive Innovation, where he works to develop intelligent solutions that advance the association's legislative and regulatory agenda to come to a cleaner, safer, and smarter driving future. Before joining the Alliance, he served as the interim president and CEO for the Alliance for Automobile Manufacturers. And before that, he was in the U.S. Senate for over 15 years, including as staff director of the U.S. Senate Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation. After David, delighted to be joined by Alan Amici. He is a president and CEO of the Center for Automotive Research, CAR. He joined CAR after a 35-year career with Chrysler and TE Connectivity, where he held a variety of positions in engineering, manufacturing, and services, where his roles included VP and CTO of Transportation Solutions and VP of Engineering. He holds several patents and was a recipient of the Walter P. Chrysler Technology Award. Last but not least, delighted to be joined by Susan Demirajan, who was the Assistant U.S. Trade Representative for Small Business, Market Access, and Industrial Competitiveness at USDR. There, she was responsible for developing, coordinating, and implementing U.S. trade policy related to a broad range of U.S. manufacturing and industrial sectors, including automotives. She has led market access and industrial goods negotiations for the USMCA agreement, Japan, Kenya, TPP, and other agreements. She's been with USDR since 2007, and before that was Director of International Trade for the American Chemistry Council. Thank you all for being with us today. And let me note that for those watching online, you can submit any questions via the Slido application, which is found at the bottom of the webpage, and we'll take questions from our online viewers as well as you in the room at the end of our session. So ITIF is in the midst of a series of research asking the question, can China innovate across a broad range of advanced technology industries? So everything from AI and quantum to biopharmaceuticals, semiconductors, and robotics. We're issuing reports like this. We're really trying to delve into the question, are Chinese companies and industries genuine innovators, or do they tend to be fast followers in their industries? Different stories, I think, sector by sector. But if you look at nuclear fission and fusion, a report I released 2 weeks ago, China has deployed as many nuclear reactors in the last 10 years as we have in the past 40. And they're currently building all 6 types of 4th generation nuclear reactor. China clearly leads the world in nuclear reactors today. And I think we're seeing that it's going to be much the same in electric vehicles. I should note also that we will be having an event at ITIF on September 18th, where we release a summary report. Welcome you to join us there. So it's staggering to think that in the year 1985, China manufactured a grand total of 5,200 passenger vehicles. This year, they're going to manufacture 26 million and account for 21% of the world's passenger vehicle production, as well as 62% of the world's electric vehicle production. China accounts for 77% of EV battery production today. And when we look at exports, the numbers are staggering. From 2020 to 2023, China's global EV exports increased by 851%. And consider this stat. In 2019, Chinese car companies accounted for 0.5% of the European passenger vehicle market. By the end of this year, it'll be 25%. That's the Chinese threat that's coming in these industries. The report kind of walks through why has China prioritized the EV and EV battery sector so strongly. And really, it's because they viewed it as a leapfrog technology. They sensed, despite their really stringent joint venture requirements and tech transfer requirements, that they weren't quite catching up in ICE vehicles, internal combustion engine vehicles. And so really going back to the 2000s, they prioritized this as a potential leapfrog industry. Also, of course, they don't want to have to import autos or the oil that comes with driving ICE vehicles. So they have long had very coherent and concerted national strategies to drive this industry forward. But as we talk about, that's also been supported by a wide range of what we call innovation mercantilist practices, forced IP transfer, IP theft, and of course, massive subsidies. This chart here just puts the industry into context. In 2024, we expect that EVs will account for about 22% of global vehicle sales. And as you can see, China in blue will be the most significant market. In 2024, analysts expect 11.5 million EVs will be sold in China, compared to 3.3 million in Europe and 2.7 million across the rest of the world, including the United States. When we look at battery manufacturing, the top two Chinese producers, CATL and FDB alone, account for over 50% of global EV battery manufacturing. And as I said, combining all Chinese EV battery manufacturers, the total is over 3/4. This, I thought, was a really staggering piece of data from the National Science Foundation. What this shows you from 2002 to 2018 is countries' share of total value added in the global motor vehicle, trailer, and semi-trailer industry. And you can see the red line for China, practically nothing below 5% in 2002, and approaching 30% today. Now, to be sure, this accounts all components and inputs from brake pads and steering wheels to seat cushions. But if China has already shown this increase before the year 2018, I really shudder to see what the data is going to be when NSF comes out with its update in 2 years. China has clearly become a very significant player in the global automotive manufacturing industry. As I talked about, what this report really wanted to do is delve into the question: are these Chinese companies really innovating, or are they copying? Are they fast followers? And maybe David, you can, and Alan, you can enlighten us further. But as I got into the research, there are two really kind of dominant types of EV batteries. Batteries that were using kind of lithium iron phosphates, or LFP batteries. Others that use like nickel, manganese, cobalt. And essentially, it was thought that this LFP approach is going to be left for dead. And US companies, Tesla, prioritized like the NMC stuff. But what's really happened is, as Ziyu Yang writes in MIT Technology Review, quote, "Just a few years ago, LFP batteries were considered an obsolete technology that will never rival NMC batteries in energy density. However, today, LFP batteries account for about 40% of the global market." And as Yang says, quote, "That's purely down to the innovation within Chinese cell makers. And this has brought Chinese EV batteries to the forefront." So yes, they really are truly innovating in EV batteries. And in fact, they probably have some of the global leading batteries today. If you consider entries from companies like CATL, BYD, or WeLion, they're producing EV batteries going 650 miles per charge. That's certainly on par with Tesla. And it was interesting to see some of the new research, some of the new Chinese startups. One company called Thailand New Energy claims it has just created a battery that can go 2,000 kilometers or 1,300 miles on a single charge. If they can really bring this to market, that would be truly transformative. It's also worth noting, of course, that Ford and GM are contracting with CATL to try and build the batteries here in the United States. So is China innovative in EV battery manufacturing? Absolutely they are, and they're leading the world. One reason why is that they have a real significant first mover and cost advantage, because Chinese companies are mining the key inputs going into batteries. So today, China dominates almost all of the middle and lower segments of the EV battery supply chain. They mine 2/3 of the world's graphite, 18% of the lithium. They own half the world's cobalt mines. And that's just the mining. When we come to the refining the processing, they're even more dominant, purifying 95% of the world's manganese, 70% of cobalt and graphite, and 2/3 of the lithium. So how can they be so innovative so quickly? Chinese enterprises up and down the supply chain are feeding these critical inputs cheaply into their companies, making them highly competitive. It's also important to note that when we talk about what an EV is, the battery is really the core thing, right? 40% of the value of an EV, of an electric vehicle, is the battery itself. Interestingly, about 45% of the remaining value comes from software and services today, because electrification and digitalization define the automobile of the future. And when we then broaden the aperture from just the battery to the broader vehicle, this is what we found in the report. China's EV companies were excelling at product innovation, process innovation, business model innovation, and even customer experience innovation. The digital features of many of these vehicles are certainly on par, if not outstripping what we're seeing in the United States. One analyst called the term digital bling, that the Chinese consumer wants the EV with autonomy, with the refrigerator, with the karaoke machine, with 3 different touch screens. It was really interesting to see how digitalized a lot of the companies have become. And Tesla and BMW certainly still lead on autonomy features, but new entrants like Xiaomi with their SU7 are really starting to catch up in some of the autonomy features as well. What was also interesting was just the rapid pace and speed of innovation. So on average, these Chinese auto companies are bringing vehicles to market about 30% faster than their so-called legacy American, German, or Japanese, or Korean competitors. And at the same time, they're on path to cost half as much as European models. This was an interesting data point from the Wall Street Journal, just showing new and updated EV releases in China from 2017 to 2023. As you can see, BYD, NIO, XPeng far outstrip their competitors like Tesla, Volkswagen, and Toyota. I understand, yes, that data point is for the Chinese market, but the broader research is showing that essentially from designing and prototyping a new vehicle of class or edition, that they're bringing these cars to market on average about 2 years, whereas it's taken at least 4 to 5 years for the legacy car makers to do so. And that's down to deeper integration with suppliers, agglomeration effects, because as a friend from Toyota was saying, if we have a change order for even just the touch screen, and we got to send that back to our supplier, and we got to work it into our design, and what do you call it? The term for the whole the CAD. Essentially, she said it's going to take like 2 years for a supplier just to turn around the touchscreen chain. In China, they just go down the street, they tell the supplier, change it, and they got the new update, by the end of the week, right? So just faster innovation processes, and that came out very clearly in the research. So this is all looking at the current market dynamics, but our research also tried to look at key innovation inputs, things like R&D intensity, scientific publication, and patents. And what was really, I think, interesting was that China now accounts for 65% of the high-impact scientific publications for EV batteries, at least among the 65% of the top 5 publishing countries, showing that they're really leading on the front-end research. And that data was apparent in turning publications into patents. And this chart shows you now that China has surpassed Germany and the US in number of PCT, or the triadic patents in electric propulsion technology. So they really are innovating on the front end. As I noted, this has been a sector the Chinese government has really prioritized ever since their 2001 10th five-year plan. Our friends at CSIS has done wonderful research finding that China has supported the sector with over $230 billion in subsidies from 2009 to 2023, including extensive federal and provincial subsidies. It's interesting that many of the Chinese provinces have their own EV champion. So many provinces are funding their own companies. And this explains why there are now over 200 different EV companies operating in China. And this leads to potential significant overcapacity in the market. This has driven down prices in their market and also globally, and it's a real competitive challenge, just like it's been in sectors from steel to aluminum. I should also note that today, policies like Document 79 are favoring domestic companies within the EV value chain. And in fact, China's Ministry of Technology and Industry recently instructed Chinese automakers to, quote, avoid foreign semiconductors, if at all possible, in their Chinese EVs. So the government is trying to force their companies to strip out Western suppliers of inputs and components and replace them with all Chinese makers. And we document the extensive IP theft that has occurred in this sector. So lastly, let me conclude with some remarks on policy recommendations and what America should do. And first to say, this is an absolutely vital industry to the US economy. It contributes about 3.5% to US GDP every year, employs over 10 million workers between direct and downstream effects. That's over 5% of America's private sector workforce. We cannot lose this industry. Between the Infrastructure Investment Act and the IRA, we have directed about $250 billion to support the broad EV ecosystem in the United States. That includes everything from charging stations to consumer tax credits to production tax credits for the producers of the batteries and the manufacturing. In July, the administration extended an initial $1.7 billion to restart and expand EV manufacturing assembly activities in 8 US states. Also in the report, though, we say we should go further. If you may know Manufacturing USA, this is a network of institutes of advanced product and process manufacturing that was stood up during the Obama administration. We have 17 of these institutes today doing everything from robotics and chemicals to digital manufacturing. We should create a Manufacturing USA explicitly for EVs and EV batteries. We have called for launching a battery shot initiative, particular government program for battery research, development, deployment that would get us to the 2,000-kilometer range at a very low price point quickly. We, of course, need to increase EV charging infrastructure across the country and ensure interoperability. And we have to recognize, in our view, that the nature of Chinese competition in these advanced technology industries, predicated so heavily on these innovation mercantilist practices, create a real credible threat to the US economy, which we have to address through both defensive trade policy measures and offensive ones. And so here we are 100% in agreement that we should maintain tariffs at 100% on Chinese EVs. And we need to make sure that this extends globally. It doesn't matter if a EV manufactured by a Chinese headquartered company is entering the United States from China or from Mexico or from Germany. A 100% tariff should apply to that vehicle, no matter what the point of origin is in the world. Lastly, just writing this report over the summer, I'm a huge soccer fan, and I couldn't help be struck watching the Euros, watching Copa America, that they were dominated by Chinese advertisers. In fact, it must be galling to our European friends that the lead advertiser wasn't Volkswagen, the German car company on the home soil where this tournament was being played. Rather, it was BYD. Now, be that as it may, we can let companies market. But what we should not allow is companies like Alibaba or Alipay to be marketing their services in the US or Europe when our companies are not allowed to sell their products in China. So we would call upon Congress to pass legislation that would say to China, if you are denying our companies the ability to sell the products in your country, then we ban advertising opportunity in the United States. So with that, I will say thank you for your attention and turn the conversation over to our panelists.
Thank you so much, Stephen. It's great to be with you today and be involved in today's panel. Maybe as my slides get queued up, I think certainly having read the report, for many folks in this room, if you haven't read it, it's certainly sobering. And it's also a poignant reminder about really what's at stake as it relates to our nation's largest manufacturing sector, the auto industry. So as Stephen queue things up, really appreciate ITIF's hosting of this event. And I'll run through a few slides knowing that we've saved some time for Q&A afterwards. Maybe as that comes up, I just wanted to give you kind of a sense of things. I want to kind of juxtapose not only what's happening in the US auto market, but also with some of what Stephen just highlighted as it relates to his report that he worked amazingly to give some keen insights as it relates to what's happening. I'm with the Alliance for Automotive Innovation. We represent 44 members that run the gamut from not only the leading producers of automobile manufacturers, but also battery suppliers, autonomous vehicle technology producers, as well as battery manufacturers and semiconductor makers. So you're just fine.
Sorry about that.
No. I'm a visual person, so if you are as well, we'll just wait for this next slide to come up. But one of the things I was going to highlight as we move into some of these slides is just to give you a sense of things for purposes of the investment that Stephen mentioned that is occurring here in the United States. And that really runs the gamut. It's not just in joint ventures or battery manufacturing facilities. It's also in assembly and the supportive architecture and structure that helps support the broader automotive supply chain.
I'm sorry.
Well, as that maybe comes up, I'll just jump right in. When I was referencing some of that investment that's otherwise occurring in the United States, it's really staggering if you take a step back. Over $125 billion and growing has been announced by the automotive sector as well as battery partners just since 2017. So that's obviously led to a great deal of interest. This is both pre-Inflation Reduction Act and then, of course, afterwards, which is, of course, sped up in recent years. To put it into, oh, you're fine.
Yeah.
Oh, here we go. If you just skip ahead 2 or 3 slides, I think I'm on the one with the US map, if that helps. But since I'm a visual person, hopefully this helps, but it gives you an idea of some of that investment. It's not just clustered in one state or one region, but it gives you a sense of the investments that are being made across the US. So the industry a few years ago underscored our desire and commitment to supporting increased adoption of electrification. And back in August of 2021, we accepted President Biden's challenge as it relates to setting a goal of 50% EV sales by 2030. And what you see in the upper box is that commitment, whereas the industry said with the right complementary policies in place, we accept that goal by 2030 of 40 to 50% electrified vehicle sales. So on the next slide, I'm going to walk through a couple things that I think are really important. In the US, what you're seeing before you is basically the production and sales in North America. And the most important thing to keep in mind that even with the significant investments that are occurring as it relates to electrification, the US still is lagging about 1 million to 1.5 million production and sales to what we witnessed prior to the start of the COVID pandemic. And I think that's really important to underscore just because obviously there was a complete shutdown of the US automotive manufacturing sector across North America for 8 weeks. And then, of course, we witnessed a shortage as it relates to semiconductors. So I think this chart does a really nice job of giving you a semblance of what's happening in the automobile sector as it relates to still kind of clawing back as it relates to where production and sales were before the pandemic. And I think that's really important to understand as we talk about increased electrification. On the next slide, I think this is also tremendously important. Stephen noted some of the sales numbers and production figures in China, but just to juxtapose those here in the US, what you're seeing is the effective electric vehicle sales for all new vehicles over the last 4.5 years. So last year, 2023, we ended with about 9.5% of all vehicle sales being electrified. And I think it's really important to kind of fully understand that when I say electrified, I mean battery electric, plug-in hybrid, as well as fuel cell vehicles. So that figure of 9.5% does not include hybrid vehicles that otherwise aren't powered by an electric motor. So this slide is also really important because it shows that degree of investment. I know obviously the numbers might be different compared to new vehicles or electric vehicles being introduced in China, but today, across the United States, there's over 113 EV models. Again, battery electric, plug-in hybrid, and fuel cell models available across a range of price points. On the next slide, I really wanted to underscore there's really 2 main headwinds that face the auto sector as it relates to electric vehicle sales. One is generally the higher upfront costs compared to internal combustion engine vehicles. So what I've shown here is kind of a chart since 2021 that really gives you a sense of what the average transaction price of all vehicles are, as well as the current price delta between electrified vehicles and all vehicles. So you're seeing about a $8,000 price difference. And again, I'm not saying that electric vehicles might not have a lower cost of operation. What I'm saying is for the average consumer, when they're going to buy a vehicle, average transaction price for all vehicles is around $48,000. Average transaction price of new electric vehicles starting around $56,000. So again, keep in mind that affordability is a significant impediment in many instances when it comes to EV sales that last year topped out at 9.5%. On the next slide, the second point that I really wanted to underscore, Stephen talked about this in his report. It's not just about the industrial policy or the investments in the private sector, or the incentives that might be provided to really spur increased electrification investment. We also need to be mindful. Remember when I said earlier, we need to ensure that there's complementary policies in place. It's no longer in the US a matter of a manufacturer producing electric vehicle. It's also about those supported policies, including charging, that need to be in place. So Stephen did a really nice job in the report underscoring what China is doing as it relates to ensuring that charging is ubiquitous. So these charts can be a little bit much to unpack, but the underlying point is if the US wanted to see a notional goal of 33 million electric vehicles, up from 6.5 million today, by 2030, remember that goal of 50% of sales, these are the type of charging infrastructure improvements and expansions that we'd need to see. On the left, you're seeing private charging, including level 2 or DC fast chargers, as well as on the right, what would be needed from a public charging standpoint. Not just a level 2 charger that would be the equivalent of your dryer's power output at home, but also DC fast chargers. So the underlying point is that we need an additional 1 million charging units available across the United States between now and 2030 to support those potential vehicle sales, like I said earlier, around 33 million. So keep in mind, price and charging are generally two of the largest impediments as it relates to broader electric vehicle interest or adoption. On the next slide, as I wrap up, I couldn't help but underscore, as Stephen noted, the importance of supply chains. And what I've done with these two charts that you're welcome to pull down on the web, but on the left, it's underscoring that even with those tremendous investments that the US and North America are witnessing when it comes to joint ventures or battery manufacturing facilities, it's pretty well understood that we're going to have enough battery capacity in the US and North America by 2030. However, we're still largely dependent upon other sources as it relates to those key inputs when it comes to battery chemistry. So again, this is just highlighting the shortfall that the US may otherwise witness with some of the goals for expanded electrification between now and the end of the decade. And then on the right, you might have to squint a little bit when you're not looking on your computer screen, but what we've done here is all of this data is coming from Benchmark Minerals Intelligence, and this might be a little bit dated, but I think it really makes the point. On the far right-hand side, effectively, if the US and other countries around the world wanted to reach their electrification goals between now and 2035, we would need over 350 new mines as it relates to critical minerals as well as requisite processing to meet that demand. So again, it's trying to put into perspective what the US needs to do, not just because China's had a 10 to 15 plus year head start, but if we want to set up those supply chains and work with allies and partners to ensure that we're either not dependent or in greater control of our destiny, we can't forget about the importance of things like permitting reform, as well as working with allies and partners to come with resilient alternative supply chains. So maybe with that, Stephen, I can end my remarks and look forward to some of the Q&A. Great. Thank you, David.
It worked. A wizard. I'll let you advance the slides. So, Stephen, thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here with the ITIF on this important topic. My name is Alan Amici, and I'm the president and CEO. Can you hear me in the back, or do I need to get a little closer to the microphone? I might need a telephone book to stand on with my stature, but the Center for Automotive Research, CAR, is a automotive think tank based in Ann Arbor, Michigan. It's been around for a long, long time, but under its present name, about 20 years. And we're, again, a 501c3 nonprofit organization. Why don't you advance the slide a little bit? I'd like to share with you just a little bit of car data on this particular slide, and then we'll talk a little bit about the needs for the automotive industry. So you see here, these are, let me go ahead with it. These are automakers' announced investment in North America between the years of 2009 and year to date through June of 2024. And you can see the y-axis, those are in tens of billions with a B, billions of dollars. The black columns or the dark columns are investment in ICE vehicles, and the light blue are investment in EVs and EV batteries. And again, these are only OEM announced investments in North America. And you can see up until about 2018 or so, most of it was in ICE. Most of the investment was in ICE vehicles. Around 2019, you see the blue bars start to grow a little bit. You're seeing a little bit of investment in EVs and EV batteries. Okay. 2020 was the pandemic, so it tamped down the investment a little bit. And then in 21 through 24, it really took off. I mean, it's remarkable the amount of investment that has occurred in EVs and EV batteries. Again, this is by the OEMs. And so what kind of investment? This is long-term capital investment. Approximately 97% of this is for manufacturing and production. We would suggest less than 3% of this is really R&D. So the automakers are looking at this saying, we need capacity to build EVs, we need capacity to build EV batteries, and this is where they're going. And again, long-term capital investment, these are difficult aircraft carriers to turn around. So this is the way the industry is going. We share this with small and medium-sized businesses in that it's risk assessment. So if you're a piston ring manufacturer and you look at this, you can see that sometime in your future, you may be shifting commodities. Okay. Also, if you use David's term, if you squint a little bit, you look at there are peaks that occur in 2011, 2015, 2019, and 2023. Those happen to be UAW contract years. If you advance, please. We're going to build the slide. Oops, go back. It builds a little bit. Yeah, there's a little red box, and there's a total there. So over the course of the last 3.5 years, $163 billion invested in electrification, so EV and EV batteries, by automakers, not tier one suppliers. This is only automakers. This is more than four times the average of the past 15 years. Just an incredible amount of money in this particular space. Okay, let's go ahead and advance. So let's talk about so that's the landscape. And I would suggest most automakers, almost all automakers, see EVs as the long-term solution. So we're going through this ICE, we're seeing some EVs, we're going through hybrids and plug-in hybrids. Now there's this kind of interim, there's a little bit of pullback from EVs. I think almost all the automakers ultimately see that for this mid and longer term, it's going to end up in an EV battery type of solution. Okay, this is not talking about hydrogen for passenger cars, which is out there quite a bit. Okay, so what are the key technologies? If you advance the slide the first time. So batteries, EV batteries specifically. So at approximately $100 per kilowatt hour, which is roughly the going rate here in the United States, a Model S has about a $10,000 battery in it. And this is much more expensive than the engine and transmission in a typical ICE vehicle. That battery can weigh 600 kilograms as well. Again, heavier than an engine and a transmission. It contains the critical minerals and the battery components that are in the IRA, that are on the IRA as bring that supply chain back to the United States. And OEMs recognize this, and they have created joint ventures with companies like Samsung and others that you'll recognize the name, LG Chem and such. This is for battery production. I mean, this is not for R&D. This is battery production. So these sites are going up around the country in various locations to be able to produce the batteries necessary for the EVs. Okay. Automakers have prided themselves on powertrain development. So companies like Honda considers itself an engine company. General Motors, they had a whole division called GM Powertrain. So it was all about the engine. And Ferrari is all about the power and the the sex appeal of the sound of the engine. So automakers globally generally do not outsource their engines. They design, manufacture their engines because it's the core of, the heart of the vehicle. That is going away slowly. ICE engines are going to be around for a while, but they're downsizing their engineering teams and they're moving to batteries and electric propulsion. Automakers understand this, and they know that the characteristics of the vehicle are defined by the propulsion system. That's why automakers have been investing in batteries and electric motors, because they want to also control that propulsion part. Okay, so here's a problem. You have a $10,000 battery and you have a 600 kilogram battery. And we know from the EPA, heavier vehicles have lower fuel economy. Same thing with range. A heavier vehicle has less range. So you want a lighter vehicle, you want a lighter battery, and you want a less expensive battery. Okay? The key to that is energy density in the battery. And you're not going to get that with a joint venture building batteries in Kokomo, Indiana. You're going to get it through battery cell chemistry design. We need to get back into, we used to lead the industry, we used to lead the world in this. We need to get back into battery cell chemistry design, because we want higher energy density batteries. We want them smaller. We want them lighter. We want them less expensive. And until you get there, you're depending on somebody else's battery cell design that you just manufacture. So this is really important. And this could be done with academic centers of excellence located near R&D hubs, whether that's in Michigan, in Detroit, or it's in Fremont, California, or it's in, locations in the southeastern United States. There are ways to do this, but we must become the leaders again in battery cell chemistry design. Next slide, please. Second is safety systems. So the U.S. is not doing very well in safety. And some of these numbers you're going to recognize here. 5 million accidents per year with police reports, 2 million with injuries requiring hospitalizations, and the number that everybody recognizes, somewhere between 40 and 42,000 fatalities per year due to traffic accidents. That's been a unfortunately, fairly stable number for a number of years, regardless of all these fantastic safety systems we put in cars, like blind spot monitor and forward collision warning, and all of the others. There's estimated to be $1 trillion in lost productivity and insurance liabilities due to these accidents. We're not doing well, and you'll see the United States stacks up really quite poorly compared to the other countries in the world. So what do we need? How do you solve that? How do you make cars safer? We've got all these fancy technologies. So one way, roadway infrastructure for smart systems. So we have demonstrated that this works. We have connectivity in our cars. Virtually all EVs have connectivity. They have 4G or 5. They have 4G networks. They have navigation systems that use the celestial networks. Connectivity exists in EVs and many, probably most ICE vehicles as well. You need to take advantage of that. Other countries are going to in their own countries. So roadway infrastructure for smart systems. Notify the driver what's happening ahead. V to X funding. So V to V, vehicle to vehicle, vehicle to pedestrian, vehicle to infrastructure. This is demonstrable. We know it works. We need to get it kicked off and implement this. This can save lives. And then finally, this nationwide automatic emergency response systems. So what does that mean? That means there's a person that makes a phone call. When there's a OnStar airbag deployment, at the other end of that, there's a person that picks up a phone and makes a call to a PSAP, to an emergency responder, and it's a voice transaction. There's no reason this couldn't be digital or automated. And if you can save seconds, you're saving lives. These are 3 very straightforward examples to take advantage of connectivity that other countries have, and we can save lives. One more time, third time. Okay, this is probably the most important one, the one we need to focus on, I think, the most. This is about software. So the U.S. lags India and China in number of software developers. Okay, that's a fact. Let's put that aside for a moment. Then there's a new core competence that OEMs consider software is a core competence. Okay, this is really important for them. And so you've heard some of the buzzwords about software-defined vehicle. What does that mean? So it means the vehicle is no longer defined by cubic inches and horsepower and bolt-on features in a car. It is defined by a new electrical architecture upon which I build software that defines the characteristics and personification of the car. So I can control the acceleration characteristics. I can control the electronic stability. I can control the features, the personal experience. All of this can be done in software. And probably the coolest part, in the old days, the last time an OEM touched the car is when they pushed it off the assembly line, and that was it. Okay, and never the OEM touches the car again unless there's some fee involved, like service or repair or something like that. But that thing is out the door, it's gone. Okay, and if you want new features on your car, you buy a new car. So with new technology that has been developed and is deployed in some instances called OTA or over-the-air updates, now your 2-year-old car can receive updates. So I could get a software patch, I could get a bug fix, I could get a new software feature for a safety system that didn't exist 2 years ago. This is really interesting. But we don't want to buy this from another country. We want to develop this, in our own country. Cybersecurity. We should lead the world in cybersecurity. This is crazy. The white hats are always going to be chasing the black hats. That's how cybersecurity works. We need to have the best white hats in the world working on this, not somewhere else. Okay, so what about this notion of low-cost country sourcing? I mean, this kind of got us into this fix about 25 years ago when the OEMs were saying, go source in China, go source in India, do this thing. Well, the automakers did that, and here's where we are today. We do not need to have more software developers than India or China. We don't need that. What we need is innovative software development tools and techniques and the ability to automate some of the software development so that we can get better performing results with the same number or even fewer people. And this includes human-in-the-loop AI. AI is really important to what we're doing, human-in-the-loop AI, for performance of systems, improving the performance of systems, improving quality. This is the most important thing on this page here. We need to be there. Okay, so how do we do this? All right. We need a deep competence in software, automation, innovation, AI, and research. That simple? Yeah, I mean, could be. U.S. needs to lead the world in cybersecurity. We're kind of there, but we seem to be more than, so we need to reinforce that. And the same idea is we can use tech hubs that are located around the country. They can be near R&D centers. They can be anchored in a university. There's some terrific, go back to battery cell, there's some terrific battery cell work that's being done at South Carolina University and Michigan State University. There's some terrific software that's being developed at Carnegie Mellon, Stanford, and University of Michigan. It's inefficient for automakers to all develop their own AI tech hubs. Let's do this intelligently. So these are the 3 areas that are key technologies for the auto industry. I think software is probably the most important. Thank you for being an attentive audience.
Great. Thank you. So Sean.
Thank you, and thank you to ITIF for first this very thorough report, and also for convening the discussion today. Excuse me, I don't have any slides because I don't have exciting technology issues to talk about. But as we have seen in the electric vehicle policy space, EVs have been emerging as a nexus for a whole range of policy issues. Such as technology and innovation, AI and connectivity, supply chain diversity and resilience, industrial expansion and economic growth, and sustainability in the energy transition. And these are all areas that we at USTR, part of the administration, have been looking at individual agencies and across the government. I should take a step back and say USTR, U.S. Trade Representative's Office, is a small agency. We're part of the executive office of the president, and we develop and implement the president's trade policy. So we work with all of the agencies that have been involved in the EV issues, commerce, energy, whoever else, Treasury, a whole range of our agencies who have been deploying all these various policies and programs that our speakers have been referencing. But given the outsized role of the People's Republic of China in the EV sector, it is important that we understand the facts behind the PRC's EV industry and ecosystem. And for that, I commend ITIF for succinctly reviewing the PRC's EV development, its outcomes, and its future trends. Because with all this discussion around the PRC's EV sector in Washington, this report is a really useful contribution for laying a baseline for understanding all these various aspects of the industry and how they come together. So while the others here have been speaking about the EV industry's innovation and technology progress, I'd like to focus briefly on the government policies that have allowed the PRC-based EV companies to advance in the global market. As the report indicates, the PRC's national and local government subsidies and other incentives are so vast that they, and I like this quote because it combines all the issues, they quote, enable Chinese companies to both sustain themselves in industries where they wouldn't be able to subsist if they had to earn market-based rates of return, and similarly sell products below cost and sustain losses while still being able to build economies of scale. So this situation has created overcapacity and global market distortions, as well as a misallocation of resources, which contributes to increased emissions and other environmental impacts. So the impact of this is not just on the EV sector, but globally on a whole range of sectors and processes and concerns that go through the supply chain. It is this unprecedented level of government interference in the market that has allowed the PRC's EV sector to expand, perhaps at the expense of other auto manufacturers in the United States, Europe, Japan, and Korea, which are also cutting-edge leaders in innovation, as has been demonstrated, but operate under market principles. So during the recent trade policy review of the People's Republic of China at the World Trade Organization, many WTO members noted that it has been more than 2 decades since the PRC joined the WTO, and that Beijing still has not embraced the open market-oriented policies on which the WTO is founded. Instead, it continues to pursue a state-led, non-market approach to the economy, and the role of the state in the economy has been growing and not diminishing. In addition, the PRC's pursuit of industrial plans, such as for EVs, does not merely harm other developed countries and economies with mature industries, such as the United States or Europe. It especially harms emerging and developing economies, as too often they cannot successfully develop their own industries and instead become more dependent on the PRC. This in turn affects whether and how US companies can diversify their supply chains to include new producers. And when we look at the supply chain of EVs, bringing in new products that were not part of auto production, such as the critical minerals involved in EV batteries, which are located mainly in developing countries, we need new, diverse, and resilient supply chains that are harder to develop because of the influence of the Chinese state-led plans. Today, policymakers in Congress and throughout the administration are looking at how we can ensure that our own EV industry and its ecosystem, which has been described, includes batteries, critical minerals, other components, and production processes, can continue to innovate and thrive here in the United States and globally in the face of such significant and market distorting impacts. So some of the initial steps have that the administration has taken and the Congress has already put into effect have been described in the report, and other interesting options have been proposed. So I think we're at a time now when we're going to be looking at more ideas and views on how to keep this moving. And I think thank the ITIF for this report to really sort of establish a baseline from which we can think about future policies that support the U.S. electric vehicle industry. So thank you again for including me.
Great. Thank you, Suchan. Excellent. And with 10 minutes left for questions, how about that? So with that, let us open the floor to questions from the audience. If you do have any, please just signal the organization that you're with as well as your name. And we'll have a microphone coming around. I'll take them as I see them raised. So you there first, sir, and then you.
Well, name's Dave Onspock, no affiliation. I'm trying to find out, you're spreading all these tariffs and that. If China were to agree to a free trade policy with their vehicles and allow our products to be sold in China, would you agree to have less tariffs, even if it meant that their cars sell better than our cars in this country, similar to the 1970s when they had the energy crisis there, and the Toyotas and the Datsuns and the Mazda and Honda became more popular, and our cars were sort of junky clunkers. Do you support protecting our industry against competition, even if it means more cost and less quality for consumers? Thank you.
Whoever wants to take it, go ahead.
David, great question. So if I was to unpack it, obviously, let's maybe do a little baseline setting. So as it relates to the U.S. automotive ecosystem, I noted earlier about 15.5 million vehicles were sold in the U.S. last year. A very, 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 very small number of those vehicles actually originate in China as part of the overall U.S. light-duty sales. Obviously, earlier this year, the administration announced effectively a quadrupling of tariffs as it relates to imports from China from 27.5% to 102.5%. If I remember correctly, that kicks in August 1? Or
Just delayed it by a week.
Okay, delayed it by a week. So I think that's important to keep in mind. As it relates to the report, and one thing that we can't overlook is obviously this is not just about the number of vehicles or the price that they're being sold about. This is ultimately about competition and jobs. And I think, some of my fellow colleagues on the panel, as well as Stephen, highlighted what can happen with market distorting policies, whether it's effectively IP theft, tech transfer, subsidization, and the like. So at this juncture, as it relates to the American consumer, there's never been more diversity in terms of products available for sale. But I think the question you're asking is, what does the future hold? And I would say if we don't effectively look at things from a bigger picture about what the ramifications are related to what's happening around the globe, that largest manufacturing sector that, has been a real shining star for this country, could exist, but exist in a far smaller manner in the future. So that's why, whether it's the regulations to automobiles, whether it's the incentives that spur some of that investment and that development of technology and innovation that really drives U.S. competitiveness, that's ultimately, what's at stake. So sorry for the long answer.
You were next if you still had a question.
Yes. My name is Elliot Shine. I'm with Representative Carson. He's on the TNI, the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, as well as the China Committee, which I support. My question is kind of based on the future as well. I really appreciate all the great data you have. My question is also related to your projection. What weight do you have on your projection as far as with the U.S., as far as the direction that the U.S. would go? It's no secret that there's a big debate between ICE and EVs, and whether to incentivize it or not. There's some saying let's not do that because we're losing jobs as far as, fuel and all that stuff. And I was wondering, I wanted to know if the U.S. chooses to not incentivize and go the ICE direction, is that going to be something like, I guess, back in the day when you had, when the introduction of telephone and the telegraph, and it's like, who would want a telephone? I mean, we got a fully functioning telegraph system, right? So my question, I'm sorry for the long question, is that how should we go? I mean, what direction? I mean, if we actually don't incentivize it, and I guess what we rely on tariffs, what are some of these options that we have?
I have a comment.
Why don't you go first? Yeah, go for it.
If you want to enrich it a little bit. But we have to think about the competitiveness of the industry. So Europe has a legislation that says 2035 no ICE sales for passenger cars. There's a little provision for e-fuels, but so Europe, if they follow that, they will get out of the ICE business. Hey, Europe. China is going EVs. So in the United States, are we going to dumb the cars down for the US market only? Are we going to sell the good technology to Europe and to China? It doesn't sound like a very competitive position, and you lose scale. I'm going to sell a third of my cars are ICE and 2/3 are EVs. So you have to be competitive. You've got to see what's going on in the global market and say, I need to play in that space. GM needs to be big in that space, and Ford needs to be big in that space. So I don't think you can cocoon this and say, we're only going to do ICE vehicles in the US and the hell with Europe and South America and China, because I think our industry is going to shrink even more rapidly in that regard. I'll let you add some color to that if you would.
No, Alan, that's great. So I love the question. So, obviously we're not forecasters as it relates to, telling the future, but I think your question's a really important one. It's not only a competitive aspect, but let's remember the US is the third largest EV market in the world. China's first, followed by Europe at around 20-25%, followed by the US at 10%. Your question's a really good one as it relates to future projections, not only for competitive reasons in terms of what the US is doing with electric vehicles, but let's remember the US currently exports about 2 million vehicles, our second largest export by value. So this question about, do we double down on internal combustion, or do we effectively compete and ensure that, a lot of the innovations that are occurring is because manufacturers are globally centered. They know that for purposes of competition, they're not just going to sell one product in one market because they may or may not exist in the future if that's the trend of where things are going. I'm not here to tell anybody that they should prefer one vehicle over another, but there's more options available today that come with a host of benefits that may or may not meet the needs of the particular user, whether they're an individual or business and the like. So I think what Alan noted is important. I think the overlay that you're talking about when it comes to the special committee and what future standards look like in the future, let's remember that auto manufacturers have one tailpipe, but they're regulated in the US by about 5 different regulatory bodies. So what we can't lose sight of is the fact that we need a degree of harmonization to make sure that we're not requiring some things or requiring it multiple times or effectively, precluding some of those innovations because the regulations have become so stringent or so costly or so burdensome that we miss the bigger picture. So recently finalized standards by the Biden administration look out model years 27 to 32. And because they are driven by a desire for efficiency or carbon reduction, only so many vehicles can get there with internal combustion. So you have to do some of the innovations that are otherwise occurring with plug-in hybrids, with fuel cells. So battery electric vehicles help to bridge that gap as it relates to carbon reductions. But again, it's ultimately about ensuring that the regulations and the consumer market line up, because if they're disjointed, that leads to, investments that obviously don't ever realize anything, and that leads to stranded investment, and that actually hurts competition. So long question maybe, and maybe a longer answer.
All right, let's take two. Okay. Quickly, sir, and then ma'am in the back. In fact, why don't you, let's get the three questions at once from the audience, and then we'll take them and wrap it.
Thank you. I have three questions. First
One
of all,
question.
Mr.
You get one question.
Three people. One.
Only one question. Okay. Okay. Recently, we heard
Introduce
from-
yourself, please.
What?
Introduce yourself.
My name is Yang. I'm from Chinese Embassy.
Okay.
Okay. Recently, we heard from the media, the former President Donald Trump said maybe the U.S. should be welcome the Chinese investors to make investment in these EV sectors in the U.S., which is not the case for now, because just as Ms. Susan introduced, the U.S. said have implemented, including the tariff measures, IRA, discriminatory subsidies, and some other restrictions, or some the national security concerns concerning the connected vehicles, like something like our supply chain investigations. So, what do you think of the suggestion of the Mr. Donald Trump?
Okay, we'll take that as a question. Ma'am, we can get yours. We'll take all three and
Thanks. I'll be
have the
fast.
panel wrap them once. Oh, yes, please,
Kate
ma'am.
Klukowitz from McClarty Associates. I was just curious in your policy recommendations and how you would implement them, notably around new tariffs on Chinese EVs that are not manufactured in China. Would you change rules of origin? How would you address FTAs? I mean, it's quite a complicated scenario to envision, but I'm guessing you have a pathway. Thanks.
I'll keep it short. My question is about hybrids, where hybrids figure in all of these numbers that you all have done, since it seems like in the United States and probably Europe, and in the northern hemisphere countries, hybrids are really the trajectory more so than total EVs, EVs being a niche kind of market. Thank you.
And sir, I believe the question.
Matthew Kopfer with Lewisburg Associates. We represent quite a few universities conducting high-level battery storage research. And so this question's more for Alan, I assume. Could you elaborate more on the role universities can play, or the academic community can play, in sort of assisting the effort of bolstering U.S. EV competitiveness? I know you mentioned a couple great universities like Stanford and Michigan. So if you could just talk more about their efforts, or maybe potential avenues for other universities to get involved. I know, Stephen, you mentioned the potential battery sort of Earthshot similar initiative. So just more information on that would be great. Thanks.
Yeah, regarding, I'm sorry.
Why don't you take the last one? Yeah. Go ahead, Tom.
Regarding battery cell chemistry, there are a whole variety of different chemistries that could be competing, that some could emerge and some could flame out. Having an organized approach that perhaps one university is looking at these two or three, and another university is looking at those two or three. So some coordinated, some coordinated methodology about finding an emerging cell technology, or a couple of cell technologies that are promising, could be the domain of universities rather than the R&D arm of General Motors or Ford Motor Company, because it's, really long-term research. Those are terrific entities. The trick is, I mean, you don't pick winners and losers at that stage, but making sure that universities aren't duplicating efforts, that the effort is spread out, that it's coordinated, and that information is shared. So South Carolina is speaking to Ohio State and to University of Michigan and Stanford, for example.
Why don't you address the, go ahead.
Yeah, Steve, I can take two maybe of the next ones. Obviously, the question on hybridization is a really good one. Here's the figures. Hybrids currently account for about 10% of all new vehicle sales. That is not part of the figure that I gave you of the 9.5% for battery electric fuel cell or plug-in hybrid. So I think that's really important to keep in mind. So hybrids plus battery electric fuel cell and battery electric plug-in hybrid fuel cell account for about 20% of all vehicles sold. So I think that's really important. And your question, I think, points to the importance of flexibility in terms of automakers, as well as consumers ultimately, picking the vehicle that may best meet their needs, whether it's internal combustion, a combination, or an alternative. The question from, I guess, the attendee from the Chinese embassy, I can't really speak as it relates to, any politician of what they might be advocating, not just current policy, but in the future. But one thing that I can underscore is there's no question that, a ton of investments occurring in the United States as it relates to expanding supply chains. At the end of the day, we need to be mindful that Congress and the administration may have proposals and or restrictions in place as it relates to what is known as foreign entity of concern. So remember earlier I talked about EVs need to be affordable, but there's some restrictions in place that preclude certain components or critical minerals in the future coming from certain countries that obviously then makes vehicles more expensive. So just a quick answer on that.
So Sean, do you wish to respond to any of the questions you've heard?
I really can't speak to that question at all, but I appreciate the fact that it was asked.
And on the question on the, applying the tariffs on the Chinese headquartered companies, certainly, I think the conversation on RUs is going to be very intense when we come to the reauthorization of the USMCA. But I would also say Congress and the administration set America's trade laws. There's no reason that a law couldn't be done that says that. Would it have implications for FDA partners? Yes, it would. But right now, we would say that if we had a problem with a fertilizer or a dog food coming in from China or somewhere in the world, we would have the ability to address that issue, no matter what the trade laws were around it. And if we have, as I think we do, legitimate issues about the propriety of the way these EVs have been produced because of the innovation and mercantilist policies we laid out, I think we have, as a country, the right to set our trade policies in accordance with our defense of interest. I also want to briefly catch Dennis Simon from USCD, University of California, San Diego, ask a question online via Slido, just to get our online audience in here. He says, hasn't China already proven it can design and produce high-quality EVs? What do you see as China's major deficiencies, since they seem to be ahead of the US already? Anybody want to address that question? Are there deficiencies to Chinese companies or their strategy in this sector?
Well, I've seen the BYD. Let's see, what is their small car called? BYD. No, it starts with an S. It's a little guy. So it's a B segment car, and we've done a competitive teardown of it, and it's a pretty good car. The fit and finish is impressive. The fit and finish is light years above where it was 20 years ago when the Chinese cars first came to market. The price point is $10,700. I mean, it's an impressive car. If it came to the market, there would be a consumer group that would be interested in it based on its price point, and the craftsmanship was pretty good. So
maybe one other aspect, obviously in the US, as I noted earlier, there's just really not a presence of Chinese automobiles currently. Obviously, we have a host of safety regulations in the US that might differ from what's in Europe or elsewhere. So I would just point out that could be a potential impediment in terms of vehicles sold elsewhere around the world. And then secondly, obviously the US follows a franchise law system as it relates to the sale and distribution of vehicles generally. So that's also something else to keep in mind as it relates to potential steps that would need to otherwise occur as it relates to selling in the US market.
Yeah, and Dennis, I would add there's certainly massive overcapacity in the Chinese sector, over 200 companies. There's certainly going to be a shakeout. A lot of companies are going to go out of business. But I think it's part of China's strategy. China's strategy is to throw a lot of companies at the wall, Shark Tank, see which ones flourish and survive, and then those that are sharpened by the iron of the domestic competition can compete effectively. So what in that instance may be a deficiency, actually probably a strength for their system over the long run. So usually we would have 90 minutes at an ITIF meeting, but like a good DC restaurant that does table turns, the house wants us out of here by 2:30. So let me take this opportunity then to thank you all for being here. Thank our excellent panelists today. And we'll look forward to continuing to have conversations with you on this critically important EV industry. Thank you all.